Institutional life. Ethics is everywhere. Organizations publish principles. Governments invoke responsibility. Technology companies speak of trust, safety, fairness, transparency, and accountability. Artificial intelligence systems are surrounded by ethics boards, policy statements, guidelines, compliance processes, risk frameworks, and declarations of public value. And yet, many outcomes proceed unchanged. The language of ethics expands, but the constraining force of ethics weakens. This is the problem examined in the Pi monograph. When ethics no longer constrains, the book does not begin with the assumption that institutions have become silent about ethics. The opposite is true. Modern institutions often speak about ethics constantly. They interpret, they justify, they explain, they acknowledge risk, they invoke responsibility. They produce legitimacy signals, but the critical question is not whether ethics is being spoken. The critical question is whether ethics still constrains action. When ethics no longer constrains, offers a diagnostic account of what happens when interpretation continues to operate after it has lost governing force. In this condition, ethical analysis does not disappear. It continues. Legitimacy does not vanish. It is articulated. Responsibility is not denied. It is distributed, processed, displaced, and procedurally absorbed. The result is not ethical silence. The result is ethical saturation. Ethical saturation occurs when systems produce more and more interpretive language while the actual structure of authority remains largely unchanged. The system becomes capable of saying the right things. It becomes capable of naming the risks. It becomes capable of acknowledging harms. It becomes capable of describing responsibility. But this interpretive activity no longer necessarily interrupts the pathway from decision to implementation. Ethics becomes present as signal, but absent as constraint. This is why the monograph develops the architecture of the Philosophical Interpretive Engine, or Pi. Pi treats interpretation not merely as moral reflection, communication, or deliberation. It treats interpretation as an engine. An engine processes signals. It converts events into meaning. It classifies responsibility. It generates legitimacy. It sterilizes narratives. It helps institutions explain what they are doing. But an engine can continue running even when it no longer governs the machine. This is the central diagnostic insight. Interpretation may continue to process meaning long after it has lost the power to stop, redirects onto stream authority. In earlier forms of governance, ethical interpretation was often imagined as a limiting force. A question could be raised. A principle could be invoked. A responsibility could be assigned. A decision could be challenged, but in large-scale procedural systems, especially those mediated by technology and artificial intelligence, responsibility becomes harder to locate. Authority is distributed across platforms, models, policies, vendors, workflows, compliance documents, institutional mandates, and automated processes. No single actor appears to hold the whole structure. No single decision appears to contain the whole consequence. No single ethical statement appears capable of arresting the system. Responsibility does not disappear. It becomes displaced. This displacement is one of the central problems of contemporary governance. The system can say, we considered the risk, we followed the procedure, we consulted the framework, we complied with the standard, we reviewed the ethical implications, but the outcome still proceeds. This is not simply hypocrisy. It is a structural condition. When ethics no longer constrains, more ethics does not automatically restore governance. In fact, more ethics can sometimes deepen the simulation. More language can create the appearance of restraint. More principles can create the appearance of restraint. More procedural review can create the appearance of legitimacy. But if none of this alters the action pathway, then interpretation has become part of the stabilizing architecture of power. This is why the book distinguishes between legitimacy as constraint and legitimacy as signal. Legitimacy as constraint limits action. It says, S cannot proceed unless the contentions of justification are satisfied. Legitimacy as signal performs acceptability. It says this action has been named, framed, explained, and associated with recognized ethical vocabulary. The difference is decisive. A system can become highly articulate while becoming less governable. It can become ethically fluent while becoming structurally irresponsible. It can become procedurally sophisticated while losing contact with meaningful constraint.
This is particularly important in AI-mediated governance. Artificial intelligence systems do not merely introduce new tools. They alter the structure of interpretation itself. They accelerate classification. They distribute agency. They convert human judgment into model outputs, workflow triggers, optimization processes, and institutional decisions. They make it easier for authority to act through systems no single person fully interprets. In this environment, the question is not only, is the system ethical? The deeper question is, can ethical interpretation still constrain the system? Can it interrupt implementation? Can it assign responsibility? Can it preserve intelligibility? Can it prevent legitimacy from becoming a mere signal of procedural acceptability? When ethics no longer constrains, does not offer a reform program. It does not propose a managerial checklist. It does not present a decision framework. Its purpose is more foundational. It clarifies the condition under which interpretation remains active but no longer governs. It diagnoses the structural limit of ethical language inside systems that can absorb ethical critique without being changed by it. This is why the monograph belongs at the foundation of the Philosophical Interpretive Engine series. It explains why interpretation must be studied structurally. It prepares the ground for later methodological work, including the issue ontology matrix. Because before a system can be corrected, it must first be properly diagnosed. And before an issue can be classified, we must ask whether the interpretive engine is still capable of constraining the power it interprets. When ethics no longer constrains, the problem is not that meaning has disappeared. The problem is that meaning continues to circulate after it has lost governing force. This is the threshold PIE seeks to diagnose, not the absence of ethics, but the failure of ethics to bind action, not the disappearance of responsibility, but the displacement of responsibility into systems that continue to operate, not the collapse of interpretation, but interpretation running without constraint. The Philosophical Intelligence Institute develops frameworks for understanding these conditions, because in complex technological and institutional systems, the decisive question is no longer whether ethics is being mentioned. The decisive question is whether ethics can still govern. Philosophical Intelligence Institute, a discipline, not a trend, a framework, not an opinion.